Welcome to The Incredible Messenger, a blend of real-world stories, expert insights, and proven strategies that keep our families, communities, and cities safe and healthy. Moving beyond rhetoric and politics to practical solutions and community safety, here's your host, Jonathan McMillan.
Hello, people. We are back. This is your guy, Jonathan McMillan, and I want to thank you for joining me for yet another episode of the Credible Messenger podcast. I am very excited about the guest who I have on today. This is a gentleman who I've had the pleasure of connecting with through one of our previous guests, Anthony Smith from Cities United. Anthony is such an incredible person because he is such a visionary and such a strategist that he recognized there are the people who are running offices of gun violence prevention or violence prevention across the country are a really small community. I think community is probably even too big of a word because we're more like a fraternities come sorority with the few sisters who we have. And anyway, Anthony reached out to a bunch of directors of offices of violence prevention and said that he wanted to bring us together to learn more from each other and then to learn some best practices, maybe even commiserate a bit, So a few months ago, we all went down to Louisville, Kentucky, had some great drinks. I still have not been able to find a good old fashioned here in Colorado. But that's a side note. But in that trip, I met our next guest, Mr. Wilford Pinkney Jr., who is the director of the Office of Violence Prevention for the city of St. Louis, correct?
Yes.
I want to say the state of Missouri.
You don't even go down the state road.
Yes. Fortunately, unfortunately.
Yes.
So yeah, we got Will, my man Will, director of the Office of Violence Prevention for the city of St. Louis. And before we jump into the conversation, I just want to say Will has been, so you're watching the podcast. I don't know if you can see it right now and just his aura. He has a very calming, very measured, very deliberate presence. And I say that in the sense of he's like that big brother, that cool uncle who went off to college and comes back and you can't wait to see him because you know that, he's going to tease you a little bit, but he's also probably going to take you in the back and like give you a beer or something. Right? So I've really enjoyed my time since I've met Will. We've connected a few times over the phone, the email, and so Will, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always good to get together with people that are doing the work. And if you're in this work, you have to love people. You have to love talking about not just the work, but people, society. We're in pivotal times, seminal times, all those adjectives that people use to describe the times that we. And so it's important for us, I think, often to sit back and just talk about what's going on.
Yeah, well, that's what we're going to do today. That is exactly what we're going to do today. I want to open up the conversation with just a get to know you question. I've talked about what your title is. You talked a little bit right now about doing the work. So let's tell the audience more about who Will is and how'd you get started with the work and what's your why and all of that.
Well, I think I'll go back. It's funny, this question came up, I think yesterday. I was at a conference on a tower, right? And you often don't step back once again to think about it. I would start by saying this. I'm that statistic, right? I'm that kid that grew up one mother-led household, first person to go to college, the kid young, wasn't married, all those things that mean maybe I shouldn't be where I am now. Also say I grew up in the projects in the Bronx. I grew up in the late 60s. I was born in 67. I'm an old man. I'm telling my age right up front so we can get that out the way. Even though I know more about rap than you do still. I grew up in the 70s in New York City, which if you remember the 70s in New York City, or anybody that might remember, it was the worst parts of New York, the worst times in New York, right? Burnt down buildings, suburbanization had gutted the city. Only people who were left were poor people that looked like me and you. I played in abandoned lots. I drank out of fire hydrants. But I didn't know nothing. I mean, it was just how life was, right? There was a lot of violence. It was the time of the heroin epidemic. So, I go through that. My parents got divorced when I was young. My sister went to live with my father. So I came from grew up in a broken family, but I still feel loved because my grandmother raised me. My grandmother worked and she came up to New York at the Great Migration. She worked in a factory that shut down all of a sudden. So she's home taking care of me. I was good in school. We didn't really play sports because it was a time when my mother worked and I moved around and went to school near where she worked. So I'm seeing all these things. I'm seeing New York. I'm seeing a lot of stuff that's happening now. I had a grandmother who lived on 116th Street and 8th Avenue, and that was like the middle of heroin, right? We used to step over people who with addiction issues. People took care of each other, right? I mean, you saw that. You knew who was the number runner. You knew who was the drug dealer. But it was still a sense of community. People took care of each other. So I see all that. Go to school, go to college, struggled because I was the first one. I really didn't have that help. I came back, started working, wound up joining the police force. Never wanted to be a cop, but I was just looking for a job, right? Taking tests. So now I'm a 22-year-old police officer in communities similar to the one I grew up in. And now you're seeing life from a different vantage point, right? Because now I'm going into people's households, I'm responding 911 calls. It was helping the community address issues, right? Locks all of abandoned cars. I'm calling sanitation to get it cleaned out, right? Street lights out, I'm dealing with that. If it's an issue with a business, I'm dealing with that. So it wasn't as much around arresting people as much as getting to know people. And I walked a big area in the South Bronx, right, by myself. So I have that. And at some point I'm like, I love policing, but once again, it wasn't something I was going to do. So now I'm going back to school because now I want to get back to stimulating my brain. But what's happening is I was there for the worst of New York, going through the bankruptcy and all that. Now I'm there as a police officer, and now for the best of New York. Crime was decreasing. Economics are getting better in the 90s, the Clinton years, everything was. But the communities that have consistently been in the top of crime rates are still the same. So as a human being, if you have any compassion, you wonder, like, what the hell is up with that? Like, why is it? So I started raising those questions in me. All right. I go to graduate school and I go for public policy. I'm talking to some people that I trusted, like, wow, what should I go to graduate school for? I've been a cop at that point for 11 years. All the stuff I just told you, like, what makes sense for me? And it was really, actually, when I started with urban planning, believe it or not. I love cities and I want to know about that. But then I went into public policy, financial management. I wanted to know, number one, you want to follow the money. You want to know how it works. But I also cared about policy. Like I said, why do these conditions never change in these communities? And so I ultimately wound up at one point leaving the police department. I did a lot of good stuff. I retired, did about 20 years. I started an LLC, started doing some leadership development for nonprofits, and started doing a lot of police training because I'm trying to bring policing to, like, think about people, right? Not just think about enforcement and locking people up. So I had started a doctoral program before I left, and so about 2018, my head of my program was like, you should do a fellowship. So like, I'm a grown man, what am I doing a fellowship for, right? So I started looking around and I found this organization called Fuse Corps that posts all these opportunities to work in these cities for a year on these great projects and really do some clear deliverables. I ended up in St. Louis. It wasn't the first choice, but St. Louis was looking for somebody to help in bail. In my mind, I'm like an ex-police officer leading efforts around bail reform. That doesn't even make sense to me, right? But, people there thought like that was cool because I had that other's perspective, right? And I was an outsider, which is good because I don't have baggage, so people will listen and come. I could be that neutral convener. So in doing the bail reform work, I really brought together people. I started bringing together this cross-sector of people to really come and look at the situation on the ground, look at reports that have been already done, look at assessment that have been done. And really just think about how do we reform or how do we build out a new framework for the pretrial system? And if you think about the work that we do, that's where it rests, in that pretrial system. If you're a social work person, it's in that. intercepts, that sequential intercept, model that 1 and 2, right? Those intercepts 1 and 2. And so in doing that work and talking with people and bringing people together so they can understand each other and understand the work they do and develop a real framework, we took 6 months. I challenged them, right? We're going to meet for 6 months every 2 weeks. And we're going to get this done by, is everybody good with that? And everybody said they were, and I worked hard. It was just me. So I'm taping meetings. I'm putting notes out. I'm creating graphics and visuals after every meeting, because that's how you keep people engaged and going on. And we did it. And so much of that work and the ideas that came out of it built itself out into strategies. Now became part of this Office of Violence Prevention and the CVI work. So, because for me, in the end, it's about people. It's about morality. It's about respect. And it's about community, right? And so how can you not act? There was a report done here. Many people probably have heard of, called the Ferguson report after the killing of Michael Brown, right? And that report talked about something that I talk about a lot when I go to talks. It talked about a shared sense of knowledge, creating a shared sense of responsibility that created a shared sense of opportunity, right? So we all know, which everybody knew what was going on before Ferguson, right? But now the Ferguson report brings to light, which it did, all of these systemic issues. You know, we have a responsibility to do something about it because we know it's not right. But it also creates an opportunity out of that responsibility for us to really be disruptive and really develop solutions. And so how could you not get to the work if you don't see that?
You just unloaded a lot, man. And I'm almost at a loss for words because there's so many pathways I could go with everything that you just said. First off, I'll start here with, man, that's fantastic. Like, to hear your journey about where you started. So again, you're a few years older than me. Yes, I'll admit that. But I'm going to hold up my mug here, okay? Just so that you understand that I am a student and a child of hip hop. 1973, both of us born that year, right? You see my, I don't know if you can see that up there.
I see.
Right. So hip hop, I love and breathe, which I obviously have to have a great deal of respect for the Bronx, right? So you've already endeared me there. I keyed you for a Harlem guy for some reason. I don't know why, but I say all that to say, growing up when I did and being such a fan of the culture, I've always thought of New York as, I don't know, a place that I just wanted to be from for a very long time. So when you talk about 70s New York, I know exactly what you're describing. I think about watching TV growing up, Beat Street and all of those things that painted a picture of what the 70s and 80s New York was like. And to know that you truly came from there to where you are now with the social dynamic that you had at home, that's just really impressive. And so kudos to you on that. And then the other part of that is our journeys are very, very much on a parallel track. It's almost like, I'm also a Marvel fan, so I would say, you know, the multiverse of, I was on the other side of the table, so to speak, you know, going to prison and being involved in the system and seeing the same things that you talked about on that side of the measure, and then be getting to where I am now, and then you and I connecting. It's like, I find pleasure in that synchronicity, I guess, is where I'm trying to go with that. Anyway, you said something that was in alignment with how I see the world as you were talking about doing that fellowship project and bringing your perspective from law enforcement to the work, and inherently seeing that there needed to be multiple perspectives and stakeholders at that table. I think you describe what we call a public health approach, bringing stakeholders who are experts from whatever lane it is to the table to come up with shared solutions and shared visions. How difficult has it been for you as somebody who's coming from law enforcement to build relationship with communities that sometimes are very oppressed or at least feel oppressed by law enforcement and police?
Yes, surprisingly, not much. I mean, first of all, I don't lead with that, right? I retired from policing in 2009. Like, it was ages ago. Even by the time I
Oh,
got to St. Louis, it was ages ago, right?
okay.
And I wasn't, I mean, I was a police officer, but it wasn't who I was, is what I did, right? So I never walked in a
Mm-hmm.
room. People usually find out after the fact and they're like shocked. Um, that policing helped me in a couple of things, right? I was a big math guy and a science guy, right? So my mind works analytically, right? I play chess, which means strategy is
Mm-hmm.
there. When I worked in the police department for probably about 7 years, I did undercover work for off and on, right? So me
Mm-hmm.
getting to really be with people in their element and not leading with, obviously I'm a police officer because I would have a problem if I got to really know people, right? I got to learn people and read people, understand all the things we talk about in terms of root causes and basic needs and all that. So I say all that to say, I know how to go into a room and just be there and listen. And I think that's what helped me. I let people talk. Wasn't about me bringing everybody in the room and running my mouth, right? No, I want to hear. I'm going to prompt. I'm going to give you something. I'm going to throw a little meat in there and let you jump on it and listen and observe and see and offer ideas. But I'm not the one that's offering solutions, because most of the times, as you know, the solutions are there. I read the Ferguson report. There's another one called the For Sake of All report. I know we had an equity indicator report that I went through. So I looked at all of the things that had already been. We even had a DOJ diagnostic done here in St. Louis. So I looked at all the stuff that have been done, and it was easy just to point people to and said, hey, this is what, somebody looked at this and this is what came out of it. What do you think about this? And a big part of that is them understanding each other, because people often say, hey, you just need to do the police to do this or social service or that, but they never have an appreciation for the world of those people, right? And so I think the simplest story I could tell that will really manifest that is we were looking at this reform of the pre-trial process, and as we started talking, we realized all these different people who have been talking about the system and helping people didn't really know what a person who was arrested, like the journey that they went through from the time they engaged the police, which is crazy, right? Because how are you helping somebody you don't even really know what's going on? And it came from the group through the conversations, not from me, right? This is how, I was a facilitator, did a lot of consulting facilitation. You got to really know how to do it well, right? So what did we do? We took the group through that whole process, literally in person. We started on the street, went to a police precinct, went downtown to, the booking area so that they could see exactly what happens and that they could at least talk about what their role might be at that point or what their role could be at that point. So that's how you really develop solutions, but it's got to come from the group. They were invested. I didn't have to say anything about it. And so those are all things that are important, but that's why I said I didn't have a problem, because obviously once people get to know you, they don't necessarily care about what your past is, right?
Right.
So, there still might be some people that don't, he's a kind of, but I had already shown that that's not what I lead with. I'm more than that in terms of how I look at the world and how I look at people and their needs.
Love that. And when I say that, everything that you just said, because you said it again a lot, that is, I hope people are picking up on, like, as, and my hope that I have policy people who tune into this podcast and say, hey, maybe we need to take a field trip down to the police station and down to the courts and down to the jail and see what this journey is like to actually assess the need and fill the gaps, right? As people are navigated through the system. Yeah. Anyway, so I hope somebody picked up where he just dropped. Okay, y'all. Another question, because I think that strategy maybe illustrates what a point I always try to make. And you may have even said it in your previous answer. So many times when we're talking about gun violence prevention, and especially because now the buzzword is we're taking a public health approach, not a public safety approach. when I hear that, I oftentimes have to push back and say, well, public safety is a part of a public health approach. Can you, for the audience and our listeners and our viewers, explain what public safety, and I don't want to use the word versus. I want to for people to understand how the two work together, and they're almost two sides of the same coin. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. Can you dissect that a bit?
So public safety, and this is interesting because I've been talking about this a lot, right? I love that we're using the term public safety more. We still hear the term criminal justice, which I think some people equate the two, and they're not the same in my mind. And we should really be talking more about public safety, because to me, public safety in the essence means people collectively coming together to create an atmosphere in which everyone feels comfortable walking in the street, sitting outside, going to the park, going to the grocery store without fear. Doesn't mean that violence doesn't happen, but to me, that's what public safety is all about, right? It's about when people do harm to people, what is the best response to that? Because the response to that doesn't have to be somebody going to jail, right? Everything to me is about each individual act. It's not about generally saying if somebody robs somebody, this is what should happen to them. Because every robbery is different. I can roll up, be screaming, cursing in your face, putting a gun, hitting you with the gun, and telling me to give you your stuff. And I can roll up with my hand in my pocket like I have a gun and tell you to give me my stuff. Those are two different things, right? And the reasons behind why I do it can be different. So when we think about public safety, it is preventative. And what can we do to ensure that people don't do those things and understand why they happen? It's preventative, even though it might be reactive and preventative. And if we see a bunch of cars getting broken into and we realize everybody's leaving stuff in their car, how do we come together as a community to take away that benefit? So people engage in that. It's intervention in that, when two people do harm, when a person does harm to another person, how can we bring them together and resolve that without that person who did the harm maybe losing their job and getting stigmatized and all the things that will lead them to do further harm? So that's all public safety, because it's holistic and it's addressing it. Criminal justice is just strictly this is the system, these are the institutions, and this is what they do, and this is how they ensure that people are held accountable, right? So we really should be talking about public safety. To get to the public health approach, public health is about physical and mental healing. And it could also be from where it aligns with public safety about communities healing, right? And individuals healing physically and mentally, and what impact that has on people's propensity to engage in violence. And the public health approach looks more, which we should be doing, and we're starting to do more in public safety approach in that, okay, what are the causes of this? We see a crime, we see activity, we see violence, or we see illness. Let's look at what are the causes, and what are those things, and how can we treat those things so that this person heals in the moment and that this community heals long term, right? So we don't have any recurrences of this, right? And how can we then provide vaccines that we can give people? How can we provide services and resources and things in the community so that this doesn't continue, it doesn't flare up, or if it does happen, it's really mild, right? And so that's where they sort of cross over in my mind. So I'm just going to tell you, I don't have that written down. So
Well, I mean, for an impromptu response, I think that was a strong one, especially because you interjected some public health terms, medical terminology that helps illustrate exactly what it is. Oftentimes when I talk about public health approach, I try to use those similarities so that people understand, just like COVID, right? We had an outbreak, we had a pandemic with COVID. It's a communicable disease, right? It means that it's passing from one person to the next. And violence is exactly the same thing. If a person experiences violence, there's a high likelihood that they can pass that violence on to someone else because they have been infected by the disease of violence. How do they get infected by it? Well, let's look at the root causes, right? We can look at the person's social economic status. Did they have housing security? Did they have food security? Did they have access to a equitable quality education? Do they have opportunity for upward economic mobility? Have they experienced violence themselves? Did they have both parents in the home, or was one parent abusive? Did they witness violence? Was one parent in jail? Was one parent or both parents addicted to substances? So all of these things could be points of infection that violence is the outcome of all of these things. And I'm only talking about with youth. Like if we start talking about, say, our veterans or people who are experiencing mental illness to one degree or another, if we consider, which I do, gun violence as in suicide, right? All of those things are applicable. So then you look at what are the things that are going to reduce the risk of this person re-experiencing violence or someone else lessening the risk that they're going to experience violence. Just like with COVID, we knew very early on that if you stayed in the house, if you washed your hands, if you covered your mouth, wore a mask, all of these things were protective factors that reduced the risk of you being infected or impacted, or somebody else, if you were sick, somebody else doing it. It's just laying that same framework and knowing that everybody contributes, right? You can't just say, well, it's only our essential workers that have to do this. It's the whole community. That was my 3-minute lecture on public health and public safety for violence prevention. Let's stay on that. Let's stay in that lane, though. I'm curious about how do you coordinate, or how do you encourage and influence coordination amongst community organizations in violence prevention? How do you foster that collaboration with the various groups? And let's be real about it. I want to hear, what are some of the challenges in leading that effort? And then what are some of the successes in that?
Well, yeah, so there's a lot there. I mean, if you got the money, you can encourage people to do a lot of things that they may not necessarily want to do. I think some of it is bringing people together on a regular basis so that they get to know each other, not just as two separate organizations, but people, and then they learn about each other's organizations. The challenge is the way philanthropic giving is currently structured. People aren't often held accountable, especially on a regular basis, to what they're doing with funds that are provided, right? The biggest challenge comes in that they're used to people giving them money, and maybe 6 months later, maybe a year later, saying, okay, what did you do with the money? And even if they didn't do all the stuff they're supposed to do, they still get money again. I come along in the Office of Violence Prevention. I'm like, well, monthly, you need to give me data. I need to get your invoices. I'm going to be checking on you. We're going to be checking in to say, you're supposed to be serving people in this age group, in this target population, in this place. And the data you're giving me doesn't show that. So what's your plan to do what we need you to do? Because while the work you're doing may be great, we are the Office of Violence Prevention. Our mission is to serve those at are highest risk for carrying weapons, being shot, and all those things. So if your programming doesn't meet and match that goal and that mission of my office, I can't fund it. By the way, you can't do this by yourself, because our overall goal is to reduce shootings and homicides, and no one organization, no two organizations are going to be able to do that. So we need more people, right? So now we're going to start bringing you together every 2 weeks so that you guys can hear from us what's going on as an office, but so we can hear from you and you can hear from each other. And if I say to the organization, what are you seeing this last month in terms of the people you serve, or in terms of a certain place? What are the gaps you're seeing? What help do you need? Now you can say, hey, we had this case where this young man or young woman had this challenge, and somebody else on the line might say, you know what, just reach out to me because we can help with that, right? So that we start to force that collaboration. But the challenge is, in the beginning, people just like, well, we got to get on this call because Will said we got to join this call every 2 weeks. And so you got to get people, as I've said, like, I don't want you just to be here, just to be here. The purpose of this is for us to really be strategic, be nimble, and be collaborative. And being in a room alone doesn't make you collaborative. And if you can say whatever you want on this call, but if when you hang up the call, you never reach out to the other organizations, that's the problem. And so that's the challenge. And you have to be, if you're going to lead these efforts, you have to be willing to make people uncomfortable and say the uncomfortable things and maybe even lose an organization or two. Because if they're not down for the cause, then we're wasting money, and we don't have a lot of money, and we don't have a lot of time. So, it's not easy. People come in line, but you also board some of them and invited some to the Cities United convene, because you can hear it from me. I can explain, talk about ecosystems and all those things. But if it's just coming from me as a funder, it may not land because you don't really get it. But as people have gone and I continue to expose them, now they're like, oh, I get it now. I understand why you want us to do X, Y, Z. And so that creates more buy-in and more. And so it's a process. You can't think it's going to happen right away, because you go to most cities, everybody's going to tell you the rosy thing like you said. Like, oh, it's great, and we got 50 organizations in the room, and we're collecting all this data. And then you start asking more questions, and you realize, this donut's full of air, right? It ain't nothing in the donut. Look good. And I agree with Doug. I appreciate your question, and I do this wherever I go. I don't want to just tell you all the good stuff. I want to tell you the hard stuff, because it ain't easy. Because if it was easy, we'd be done it already. We wouldn't need to be doing anything. So, that is the thing. You have to be consistent. You have to be honest. I mean, I sit down with people when we talk about contracts and talk through what's going to happen. I sit down with them after the contract's signed, probably a month or two, to talk about stuff. And every month, I'm gonna be in your ear, like, what's up? So you understand that we're serious about what we're doing, and this isn't just a simple like, hey, take this money and go for it.
Man, Will, I appreciate that a lot. I'm curious. I'm going to circle back to part of what I'm going to now call your origin story. Transitioning from, and I love the way that you say it, that you weren't a police officer. Law enforcement is what you did. I love that. With that in mind, I would love to hear, what was the transition like for you, going from being in uniform, wearing a badge, doing law enforcement, to now doing this type of work, leading coalitions and collaborations and being at a policy level? What was that transition like for you?
It wasn't bad. I mean, like I said, so I didn't mention this, and this would be something you haven't heard me talk about. So this is, every time we talk, you'll probably learn something about me. So in 2001, I mean, there was a lot that happened in that year for me, right? So obviously, I was in New York, and it was 9/11. What happened there? I went back to school in 99 because I just had that urge to go back. I loved what I was doing, but I loved learning. And I loved school. I was a really good student. So, that's why I say policing is what I did, but I didn't hang up with cops off duty. So I had my friends. I didn't talk about my work when I got home. My family didn't know anything about what I did at work. They would ask me stuff, and I'd tell a joke and move on, right? But in 2001, my daughter's mother committed suicide. And my daughter was 4 years old. So I don't talk about this necessarily, the connection, because it's always awkward to me when you're in the work, and I hear a lot of people telling their stories about, I was a victim of gun violence too, and trying to, I guess, for legitimacy purposes. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but sometimes, especially where I am, I don't want people to feel like I'm forcing them to say, like, I understand, because I still, like, my griefs and trauma is different than somebody whose family member got killed in a house. But it happened to me, right? So that started to change my life in the sense that I became a single parent and had my 4-year-old daughter who was too young to really know what was going on. And I was starting to think about changing my lifestyle. Like, at that point, I was doing narcotics. I was doing a bunch of wiretaps. You saw The Wire. That's why I never watched Wire. That's what I did. But that meant a lot of hours of work, right? So now I needed to change my life a little bit, because now I had somebody else to take it. Not that I wasn't taking care of before, but it's just me. So that's one thing that got me to moving away from really working in the street a lot I wound up transitioning to working in a prosecutor's office as a police officer. And I helped them build out this gang education unit that started to look at groups that were committing violent crimes. And so we would look at areas where there were increases in shootings and homicides, and we would go in and cultivate informants and do investigation. So I did that for a little while, but when I first moved there, I was recruited to go work in an office called the Office of Management Analysis and Plan in the police department. So it was their planning bureau. It's like their think tank. And that was because I was good at math, a logical process of thinking. And then I went to graduate school. In the graduate school, I did a lot of our statistical analysis and all. So all of this stuff is starting to move me away from just thinking about cops and robbers and running around and chasing bad guys, right? There's another world outside of police, which a lot of police officers or people who are employees of police department, they become so engrossed in the world they can't see anything else. And nothing else matters, right? And
If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
exactly. So like I said, I went to graduate school. I took a 3-year break. I started teaching in schools that are across the city. And I was teaching a lot of non-traditional students. So now that gets you back connected to, at that point I'm in my 30s. I think I'm young, but like to a 17-year-old, 19-year-old, I'm an old man. As you get back into teaching, you get to hear young people talk, and you get to see what's going on with them. And then I go into my doctoral program, right? Because now I'm really looking to elevate my level. I'm all in American politics, public policy. I'm doing deep readings and all that stuff. I ultimately moved to that Office of Management Analysis and Planning. They recruited me again. And about 2 years before I retired, so 2007, I led a big survey project where the police department surveyed people who was victims of crime. And I worked with the American Association of Opinion Research and one of the big survey groups to sort of build out a really good survey that they validated that was running. So you see, I'm like, now I'm doing things that while I'm in a police department and looking at it from a high level and I'm thinking more about strategy than about enforcement, right? And I started being part of workforce analysis. So all the stuff that I was able to build from a leadership standpoint, like I can do now, I built those skills. And then I left the police department, right? And so, the transition was easy because I was gradually already moving away. I left out that I did my LLC in 2005, so about 4 years before I left. And I started doing some small work here and there around that. I was building myself to be something else because I knew I was going to be something. So when you do it like that, the transition isn't hard, but also along the way, all those things I described gave me the skill sets to do this work, right? So when I say a job is what you do, is not who you are, a group of students, you want to be known by your skill sets, not by your professional experiences, not by the jobs that you had, because people will pigeonhole you. It's probably happened to you too, right? I've had people as I moved to all those different jobs say, what are you doing? You can't do that. This is what you do. Because that's all they knew me as. But I'm not going to be defined by how you know me. I'm going to define myself. And so that's something you should always be thinking about if you're a young person listening as you build your professional or take your professional journey.
Oh, yeah. So many people have put a label on me based off of my life experience and where I've come from. And with that label, there was an expectation of what I was going to do or not do. And so that's been the experience. My mind's going 1,000 miles an hour because you drop so many gems every time you answer that I want to ask 12 follow-up questions, but we don't have time for that. So the follow-up question, the 1 or 2 follow-up questions I want to ask are this: with your skill set and the way that you show up, you're a policy person, you're a strategist, you are obviously a very learned person with all your experience in higher education, business owner, LLC. Do you still experience, and I'm trying to ask this question so that however you answer, you don't necessarily neither one of us get in trouble. Politics with a big P. Okay. So actually, you know what? I want to reframe the question like this. Working in gun violence prevention, right, and firearm-related harm prevention is a very political topic. with your experience and the way that you have your career path has always been about serving the people in the community first and doing that through a human first and probably data second approach. How does politics with a big P impact the work that you're doing now, if it does?
Of course it does, right? So, and when just because something impacts something doesn't mean that you have to let it negatively affect it, right? But it definitely impacts it because any issues around guns is a polarizing and a partisan issue. And if you let people frame it, this is the discussion most of the time, right? Take all our guns away versus, not hold people accountable, right? But those are two extremes of a discussion. And those extremes also don't highlight people, they highlight ideology. So I work for a city, and be in charge of implementing something that's a part of the mayor's agenda, there's politics, right? And you have to navigate those. But the best way to navigate those things is to make sure you keep politics out of the work. You can't be afraid to talk to anybody. You should take every advantage to talk to everybody, to understand what is needed to either get allies or prevent people from targeting you and the work that you do. You also have to keep yourself, and I said this before, right? I don't lead with me. I lead with the work, right? And so I'm always going to keep the focus on community. In fact, because of politics, when I talk about it, and I know you appreciate this being in Colorado, I'm going to talk about it from the needs of a community, whether it's people in the city of St. Louis or in the rural areas of Missouri. And I'm going to talk about how those needs match it. So the politics I can't prevent. It doesn't mean I have to play into the politics in doing the work and in soliciting collaboration and partners and developing strategic relationships. So yes, anybody who says politics doesn't matter is crazy. But I would also say anybody says that they can't do the work because of politics, I won't say they're crazy, but I say they're mistaken. It was his perspective, right? But I think the first thing you have to do is understand whether it's him or whether a Black person calling another Black person or Uncle Tom, right? You have to understand what is the reason that they're doing that. Like, they probably have a valid reason for saying it, even though they may be incorrect in their thinking. Once again, goes back to public health. What is the symptom? What is the thing that gets them there? So if you start with that, then it allows you to do what? To listen, right? To probe. So I started to ask this Caucasian man, about why he thought that way, how large was the population in the area that he was responsible for protecting, what percentage of the people in that population were Black or white, what percentage were on wealth, all these things. I just started to ask some questions to get him to see what. Number one, there were more Black people in that area than white people on welfare, right? Number two, even for the Black people he engaged, the number that he was engaging in this way was such a small percentage of the overall population that he was making this generalization, right? By the end of the conversation, he said, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to go into those communities, I'm going to apologize to those people because of, this conversation I had with you and how it made me really step back and think. We don't make people step back and think enough. We just become angry. And it lets people off the hook. So same thing in my job. I'm in a really red state. I call the governor's office and say, hey, I'm not calling you to tell you anything. I'm just calling because I work for the city. We have this issue and I want to support you and figure out how we can work together. I'm not here for the headlines and all that politics stuff, but I'm calling you as well and I want to help you and I want you to help me. And so how can we do that? And if you can do that, you can diffuse any of that work. And that's my book.
That's politics with a small p.
That's right.
Appreciate that story a lot. It reminds me of when I was doing direct services and working with gun toters and actives, finding out that why, right? And it's not just that first why, it's 5 layers of why. So you can understand how did that worldview, whatever worldview that they have, how did that formulate? And what decisions were made based off of where they started, whether that's physically, mentally, philosophically. Figuring out where a person started and how they got to where they are is the best way to find, hopefully, common ground, or at least a level of understanding.
And knowing that you may not get there, because I'm not having this conversation to change your mind. I'm just having a conversation with you. If you change your mind, that's on you, right? He changed mine. I didn't tell him to go apologize to the people. I want you to come to that. Because if I tell you, then it's not your thing. It's me telling you I'm trying to change your mind. I'm not going to change your mind.
The other thing you said in that response was something that I learned, I don't know, a few years ago. We had a police chief, old school dude. I believe was he from St. Louis? I think he might have been. Chief White, kind of old school black guy. The community was upset. The community was upset with the police, as you know, it's often the case. And one of the responses from part of the community was, we need more black police officers in policing black neighborhoods and communities. And Chief White said something that was just so profound to me, because on the surface, that sounds like a great idea. He said, but you have to understand that black police officers, white police officers, male police officers, female police officers, Hispanic police officers, short police officers, tall police officers, the majority of the time that they are called to a situation, they're dealing with people on the worst day of their lives. And if you put whoever the officer is in a community that's predominantly black, predominantly Hispanic, predominantly homosexual, or predominantly Jewish, every time they're called to a scene, they're dealing with people on the worst day of their lives. A bias may organically form against those people, because you're dealing with such a small population, but it's the population that you're dealing with over and over and over. And unless you have the critical thinking skills that you walk this gentleman through, saying this is a very small percentage of a very large population that you happen to deal with on a routine basis, and step back and see that bigger picture, you may start to think that all blank are blank, right? We see it on the reverse too. When people say all cops are, whatever they say, we're typically seeing the news reports about the cop who didn't do his job the right way, right? We're talking about the officer or officers who were out of bounds, but that's what makes the news. And it builds and then reinforces a bias, which is just, biases are natural. That's how our brains work. Will, I'm loving this conversation. I'm thinking that a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it. I have a couple of questions left over for you before we transition to the other segment of the show. My first question is this: with you being such a analytical, strategic thinker, how are you measuring success for the Office of Violence Prevention in St. Louis?
So I think that's based on the point in time, right? So in this first year, I'd say I measure success in that we actually have a budget, and we actually have staff, and we've actually set up systems, foundational systems that will allow us to do our work effectively and efficiently. And this first year hasn't been about, moving the needle.
I think that's a very measured answer, wise answer, as I've come to expect from you. Do you have any specific strategies or tactics that you use to make those conversations with the people who are on the extremes, bring them more towards the center, or even to a space where you can have a productive conversation, or if they can have a productive conversation around the issue?
So I'll give you, I always like using actual stories for examples. So I'll give you an example. So I was in Indiana. I won't name cities, keep it generic. I was in Indiana, and I was invited out to dinner by a Caucasian male. I was leading the class I was doing, and I was the only person of color in the room. and I'm leading this discussion. This person wanted to go out to dinner afterwards, which we did, and wanted to talk about welfare. This problem of Black families, basically teaching their kids how to be self-sufficient and just, enabling them, and they just continue this process of being on welfare. And so there's many different ways to approach a conversation like this as a person of color, right? Because this is clearly somebody, I see myself in the middle, right? But this is clearly somebody on an extreme, and he wasn't a bad person. I don't think he was a bad person, right? It just, in terms of decreasing the number of domestic violence assaults and decreasing, the number of people with addiction issues who overdose or something like that, right? Because it's too new. We could set those goals, but to me, it wouldn't make sense because we were building an office. So you're not going to be able to effectively do that, even though we're contracting out most. And I think we've set an expectation because so much of work about an individual, about an office is when people go to that office or individual, they know that they're getting X, right? And that's why they go to, right? If I'm dealing with Jonathan, I know this is how it's going to go. So I think setting those expectations is really important. But I do think data-wise, we built a data infrastructure as well. We collected data from our partners, but thinking about how to collect that in ways that we can start to look at not only operationally are they doing what they're supposed to do based on their contracts, but what has been the impact on people and on the communities that they're working in, right? And that's not just from the data that they give us, it's also getting data from other sources. And so we built this infrastructure where we can get that data. And now we're starting to look at what questions do we want to answer so that we can understand how we're going to analyze that data. And then what we're going to keep operationally and what we're going to display to the public. Because that's how you tell a story, but some of that story isn't quantitative, it's qualitative, right? How do we start to tell stories? How, Cities United has done some of this for Baton Rouge. I just saw a really good video put together by some people in St. Louis County that really tells the impact through a human focus, right? And so I think those are all ways that you start to really think about the impact, but we do have to be honest and say, for the outcomes that we do want to see, like increased graduation rates, decreased domestic assaults, what's the difference between outputs and outcomes? We want to see higher rates of people with primary care physicians, and we talk about public health approaches, right? Increases in graduation, increases in employment, increases in housing, or a decrease in number of homeless people. Those are going to take a little while. We can't expect to see those in the early parts, in the early days in the creation of any office. But those are outcomes that we want to start to identify, but we want to do that in conjunction with the community. What does the community see as success? How are they defining public safety in those individual neighborhoods? So we have to think about that.
I love all those answers. 2 more questions for you real quick. Oftentimes when we talk about violence prevention, gun violence prevention specifically, the subject of mental wellness comes up. Mental wellness and mental illness usually wrapped together in mental health. Everything that you've talked about, root causes, right, of violence in these communities and the different violence that you experience in the city, you've been very articulate about what those root causes are. And I'm going to draw the through line for people when you're experiencing all of those issues, homelessness, poverty, all of those things, that leads to a lack of mental wellness. And so we know that your office is supporting mental well-being through the work that you're doing. That being said, you personally, as a very calm, cool, collected, very measured, very deliberate, very intentional person who shows up with just this aura of master sensei, I think it's very easy for people to assume that this work doesn't take a toll on you. I'm going to make that assumption because you're just so cool. I need to ask you though, for those who are listening who are in similar roles, how does Will prioritize your mental wellness and your mental well-being in leading all of this?
Great question. I am human. If you prick me, I do bleed. I'll say it this way, right? I think 20 years of working in policing desensitizes you in the sense that you're probably not impacted by things in the way that other people are. Things that other people might find stressful, I might not. Doesn't mean that I don't find things stressful. You're right. You're not going to know it unless you're really close to me. And we're having a private conversation and I go on a ring with, I know when I'm at that point when I need to go home for a weekend and I don't want to leave and I just want to look at TV or I just want to listen to music and just chill. I know that there are times that I have people that I trust and are close to me. I know I need to call them and be like, let me just show you what's happening to me or what happened. And I need to just talk it through, to just talk about it instead of holding it inside. Sometimes, believe it or not, for me, wellness is in the work. And not in the work is the daily, but it might be just going out to a community event because sometimes you just need to see little kids. You need to see the smile on people's faces or hear that person say, I really appreciate what you guys have done. And I didn't even know these things, because we can also get caught up in our own bubble of this ain't happening, that ain't happening, we're not moving the needle, all the challenges. And you don't realize how much of an impact you've had on people. And it really takes one person at a time. But yeah, I know when I'm getting to those points when I'm like, I need to take a step back. I need to get away for a couple of days. I need to go to the movies. I need to watch some fantasy or Marvel movie, whatever it is. And I think as you get older, you just understand. I think a lot of stress and trauma comes from people wanting everything to be perfect, wanting everything to work out. They expect that I just do this, right? It's all going to be good. And I think the more experiences you've had and the older you get, everything's going to be all right, but you expect the bumps in the road, right? Like, this is what's going to happen. So I'm not as stressed by it because I expect it to happen. And I'm already thinking about when it does happen, this is what I'm going to do, right?
Case management 101, when you're working with some of our young people and some of the folks that we attempt to help themselves, you have a crisis management plan in place for when you do hit those bumps, right? So having it for yourself is admirable, right? It's fundamental. It's elementary. Very few of us do it.
It's not easy.
So, yeah.
It's not easy.
Well, man, this has been great. So I appreciate you, man. Will, the show is called The Credible Messenger Podcast. And, I think that this conversation that we just had, again, proves why I am more than just a pretty face sometimes when I invite the people who I invite onto the show to represent what it means to be a credible messenger in this type of work. So many times people tend to think that credible messenger only means that it's somebody who was formerly incarcerated or somebody who was in a gang, or that oftentimes gets misconstrued, right? And knowing that there's a lot of different ways to perceive what a credible messenger is, your experience, your skill set, the way that you show up just as a mentor for me and others who are in this space, I know that you legitimately walk as a credible messenger because that's just who you show up for as me and others. So with that being said, I want to close out this episode with one last question. What's the message that you want to leave to people listening to this conversation?
So I thought about this. I know you mentioned this in the beginning, and it's something that I saw one time because I think it applies. And I go back to this every once in a while when people send me messages and they seem feeling something or lost. So, and I don't know who the quote is from, so I'll say that. Permanence, perseverance, and persistence, in spite of all obstacles, discouragements, and impossibilities. It is this that in all things distinguishes the strong soul from the weak.
Thank you. I'm almost at a loss for words. Perseverance has shown up in my life so many times in just the last week. So that was powerful. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think that maybe that's the second time today that word perseverance has shown up. So I appreciate that so much. It was got me a little emotional there. Man, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm sure anyone who has made it this far into the episode is also just as appreciative as I am. And they may have questions. They may want to reach out to you because they are maybe in the St. Louis area, or maybe they're somewhere else in the country doing this type of work and need to connect with you in some shape, form, or fashion. How would such a person connect with you?
You can reach out to me through my email, my personal email, will.pinkneyjr@gmail.com. You can also reach out to me, call me, 314-299-2187.
Thanks again. You all heard it. And speaking to you all, man, I am just beyond grateful for everyone who has been tuning into the Credible Messenger podcast. If you can't tell, this is a work of passion for me. And it's a work of passion because I want to bring to you all, the audience, resources, support systems, people who are of value into your lives and information. And so I know that if you've made it this far into this episode and all of the episodes, you are my people. Thank you for showing up and listening. I ask you, if you made it this far, do me a favor, whatever platform you're listening on, make sure that you like it. If you're on Apple or Spotify, leave a review and then share this. Thank you again. I'm Jonathan McMillan. I'll check you on the next episode. Peace.